When individuals spend more time alone than what's generally deemed typical, concern arises among those around them. Questions bubble up. What's happening with them? Are they all right? Could they be depressed? And so we urge them to step outside, engage with others, and form connections. Humans are social beings is a common refrain. Or, no matter what, avoid isolation. It's detrimental to your well-being. However, such advice often seems to be ignored. The person in question shows no interest in socializing, forming relationships, or making new friends. They simply wish for solitude. Choosing to isolate oneself is a multifaceted issue, one that I'm intimately familiar with, as I'm navigating through it myself. From my perspective, social isolation isn't always something that happens to us. Quite often, it's a conscious choice. It's a retreat from the drawbacks of social interactions, an act of tuning out, of deciding to step out of the ring, to refrain from participating, at least temporarily. I won't shy away from acknowledging that this mindset isn't entirely healthy. While self-chosen isolation provides a sanctuary within the comfort of one's own space, it simultaneously cuts off social engagement with others. It's a withdrawal from public life, a sanctuary within one's thoughts and personal universe. This isolation can leave one vulnerable to psychological distress, resentment, skewed perceptions of reality, and the dark corners of online echo chambers. Yet I argue that social isolation is comprehensible. It's not merely a reflection of contemporary culture, but also an aspect of the human condition. So what drives many to seek solitude and isolation? What motivates them? And is there a way to address this phenomenon? This discussion delves into social isolation and the notion that solitude is not always an accident, but often a deliberate choice. The intricacies of social isolation cannot be understated. Social isolation and loneliness, while closely linked, are not the same. One can be isolated without feeling lonely, content in their own company. Conversely, it's possible to be surrounded by people, to have numerous friends and social ties, and still feel a deep sense of loneliness. Therefore, while social isolation is an objective state, varying in form and intensity, loneliness is a subjective experience. As such, some who are isolated rarely feel lonely, though this doesn't imply they are without issues. There could be underlying problems driving their preference for solitude. For instance, schizoid personality disorder is marked by a lack of desire for social interactions and a predilection for being alone, accompanied by an absence of pleasure in many activities. My own journey has included periods of what I'd describe as semi-social isolation. I use semi because I've never been completely cut off from social interaction. Complete social isolation has become a rare phenomenon in the digital era, given our ability to connect with others online, albeit these connections are often superficial and digital rather than physical. In discussing social isolation in this narrative, I'm primarily addressing semi-social isolation. Even during these periods, I've maintained a few friendships and connections with my siblings, mother, stepfather, and extended family. However, there were times when my interactions with them were minimal, especially while living alone. My interest in engaging with strangers online was also limited. The duration of periods spent without in-person interactions lengthened once I transitioned to full-time content creation in 2019. The arrival of the pandemic in 2020 further extended these periods, leading to weeks without seeing anyone. Reflecting on these times, I acknowledge feeling lonely and disconnected, though not always troubled by this solitude. As normalcy has resumed, I find myself missing the quiet and solitude imposed by government lockdowns. Despite the loneliness, there was a sense of unprecedented peace, a break from the world that I had partially experienced after leaving the office environment. The enforced isolation lifted me to a new level of relief by eliminating social obligations like unwanted party attendance. The pandemic served as the perfect excuse to avoid social gatherings, and the cancellation of events, though unfortunate for others, was secretly pleasing to me. However, there were moments when I longed for social interaction, battling between desire and aversion. Reflecting on what the Stoic philosopher Epictetus might have advised leaves me pondering my human nature. My feelings about that period are mixed, as I weigh the benefits and drawbacks of my experience. It revealed to me that social isolation is a complex response to an inherent human dilemma. We are drawn to and repelled by social interaction simultaneously. I yearned for what I simultaneously enjoyed avoiding. Moreover, the pandemic fostered a silent solidarity among us. Suddenly, I was not the only one spending vast amounts of time alone. Government mandates had created a community in isolation. This shared experience made solitude more bearable. Through minimal interactions, I've observed the impact on my thoughts, perceptions of the world, and emotional well-being, which wasn't entirely positive. Yet, I've also experienced the tranquility of being apart from others for an extended period. The peace and joy found during lockdowns were surprising, contrasting with the general disdain for the situation. At times, I pondered why I wouldn't have minded if certain phases of my life had stretched on a bit longer. This led me to question, what's going on with me? It felt as though I was evading social encounters, seeking refuge in my own solitude. The wisdom of Arthur Schopenhauer, an 18th century philosopher, seemed to resonate with my inner queries. Schopenhauer articulated the intricate dynamics of human relationships through what he termed the hedgehog's dilemma, a metaphor that beautifully encapsulates our social conundrums. Picture a cluster of hedgehogs on a chilly winter day, faced with a predicament. Their first instinct is to huddle together, seeking solace and warmth in each other's company. However, this closeness brings about a certain discomfort, as their spines inadvertently inflict pain upon one another. This leads to a significant number of them choosing solitude over mutual warmth, braving the cold on their own. This allegory, as Schopenhauer presents it, mirrors the paradox of human interaction. We have an innate longing for connection, yet it's this very interaction that often leaves us wounded, sometimes deeply so. For a few, the shadows cast by these social interactions eclipse their benefits, driving them towards isolation. How does this philosophical musing apply to me? It dawned on me that Schopenhauer's analogy precisely depicted the struggle that has been a constant backdrop to my adult life. My preference for solitude wasn't merely a lifestyle choice, but a response to the spikes of past interactions that left scars too painful to ignore. Despite my introverted disposition, there was a time when I thrived in social settings, albeit often with the aid of certain, let's call them, social enhancers. However, as time passed, those days became memories rather than realities. Age, along with the evolving stages of life, undoubtedly plays a role in this shift, but it's not the sole factor. This pattern of seeking solitude, influenced by previous painful encounters, is not unique to me. My time in Asia, immersed in the semi-autobiographical worlds of Bukowski's Post Office and Ham on Rye, brought this into sharper focus. The protagonist, Henry Chinaski, navigates life with a palpable sense of disconnection, spurred by the monotony of his job, his defiance of societal norms, and the ostracism he faces. Like Chinaski, I found a semblance of comfort in alcohol, a bittersweet remedy for past wounds and a makeshift bridge to social ease. Bukowski, renowned for his reclusive nature, often found solace in the quiet company of a select few, or in the solitude of his own thoughts, immersed in literature and the craft of writing. When confronted with the question of his disdain for humanity, he famously retorted, "I don't despise them, I simply find peace in their absence." Beyond the scars of trauma and the sting of social rejection, myriad reasons drive individuals towards the embrace of solitude. A striking manifestation of this can be observed in Japan, grappling with a segment of its population, primarily men, who decisively turn away from societal engagements, choosing a life of seclusion. Dubbed hikikomori, these individuals embody the phenomenon of social withdrawal. My brief sojourn in Japan, spanning almost 2 months not so long ago, offered me a glimpse into the conceivable reasons behind the inclination towards isolation among Japanese people. Japan, to me, was akin to a utopia, remarkably safe, meticulously organized, aesthetically pleasing, and functioning with seamless precision, from the bustling streets to the punctuality of public transport. However, my interactions painted a picture of a society marked by rigid hierarchies and a noticeable difficulty in forging connections, perhaps exacerbated by language barriers, accompanied by a pervasive societal pressure. The societal blueprint in Japan sets forth stringent expectations for its citizens, urging them to ascend the professional ladder and establish families within a framework where success pathways are narrowly defined. Post-education, the norm dictates immediate employment, often culminating in lifelong allegiance to a single employer. The work culture in Japan is notoriously demanding, characterized by prolonged work hours and an expectation of unwavering loyalty and dedication. This backdrop of societal demands and expectations serves as a fertile ground for understanding the nuances of social isolation. The hikikomori can be categorically split into 2 groups. The initial faction found itself adrift during Japan's lost decade, a period marred by economic turmoil, failing to align with societal benchmarks and subsequently receding into isolation, partly propelled by a sense of shame. A newer wave belonging to the younger echelons, despite being presented with opportunities to conform, consciously opt out of societal participation, averse to its exhaustive demands, and opting to distance themselves from the cacophony of societal expectations, though their reasons are multifaceted and vary on an individual basis. A majority of hikikomori reside with their parents, while a fraction, through self-employment, manage to sustain an independent lifestyle. Their existence is marked by a profound detachment from the outside world, with negligible to no social interactions. Emulating the essence of hermits, their withdrawal is not necessarily from the world at large, but rather from the societal constructs and expectations within it. Reflecting on the historical continuum of hermetic traditions, from the ancient desert fathers to Taoist sages, the pursuit of solitude emerges not as an aberration, but rather as a nuanced expression of the human condition. Despite our often cited need for companionship, some of us thrive, and even flourish, in solitude. Even the ancient Stoics, known for their cosmopolitan ethos and advocacy for engaging in public life, acknowledged solitude as an inherent aspect of the human condition. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, once remarked, "We should also prepare ourselves to be self-reliant, to enjoy our own company. Just as Zeus finds contentment in his solitude, reflecting on his governance and engaging with thoughts that are his own, so should we be capable of introspection, independent of others, never at a loss for how to occupy our time." Solitude hasn't always been a serene experience for me. I've felt the pangs of loneliness and symptoms of depression in the past. During the pandemic, the lack of human contact, not encountering another soul for weeks, began to weigh heavily on me. It turns out I'm no sage. Social interaction is a need for me, albeit to a lesser degree. In this vast expanse of solitude, I found myself in an unprecedented level of isolation. And while I coped, I discovered that my own company wasn't always the most pleasant. Solitude can lead to harmful and obsessive thinking. Inner dialogues become more frequent, and without others to share our thoughts with, we risk bottling them up, sometimes evolving into a tormenting analytical tumor. We often overlook the value of another's presence, someone to listen, who can challenge our cognitive distortions and destructive thoughts, reminding us that the world isn't as bleak as we might perceive, or that our thoughts are colored by personal biases rather than facts. The company of others can rejuvenate our spirits and refresh our mindset. During prolonged periods of solitude, I found myself missing my old job and colleagues, to the point where I yearned for the monotony of a dull meeting, just for some social interaction. I looked back with fondness on office banter, the laughter, the camaraderie, conveniently glossing over the less enjoyable aspects of workplace life. Surprisingly, I felt nostalgic for the very thing I had left behind, realizing that while I don't regret my decision to work alone, complete isolation isn't ideal either. The dangers of social isolation are well established. Research has connected it with depression and anxiety, increased stress, diminished self-esteem, alongside physical health risks like a weakened immune system, heightened inflammation, and sleep disturbances. However, how significantly these issues affect an individual varies. Some thrive in solitude, while others struggle with any measure of loneliness. At one extreme, we find hermits who, driven by spiritual or philosophical convictions, seek out isolation, find self-sufficiency, and experience profound peace and fulfillment in their solitude. Such individuals, like a Christian hermit immersed in prayer, may find a deep connection with the divine, finding such engagement so enriching and significant that ordinary social interactions seem unnecessary. For many, the idea of leading a solitary life isn't exactly appealing or even desirable, yet there's a curious thing about humans. Even those who cherish their solitude also crave social interaction at times. So, what's the middle ground here? Is there a way to balance these seemingly contradictory needs? Drawing from my own journey, I've discovered that understanding the reasons behind my own inclination towards solitude has been enlightening. For me, solitude isn't just a single-layered need. It's complex and multifaceted. It's a space where creativity blossoms and self-reflection deepens, which I see as incredibly positive. However, I must confess, not all my motivations are sunlit and uplifting. There's a darker side too, tinged with fears of social engagement, anxiety, shame, guilt, and the shadows of painful memories. Acknowledging that my reasons aren't solely positive has been a pivotal part of my journey. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once pondered over what he called the hedgehog dilemma, reflecting on how to socialize without feeling the sting of closeness or the chill of isolation. His proposition? A dance of politeness and good manners, a way to engage with others while maintaining a safe distance. Yet, even Schopenhauer recognized the flaw in his plan. It lacks the genuine warmth human connections can offer. So, faced with the potential for pain, rejection, or meaningless chatter, what do? My approach has been to choose selectively and think creatively. I've learned to be choosier about my interactions and the company I keep, seeking out quality over quantity. The pandemic years forced me into an extended period of solitude, but the easing of travel restrictions in the summer of 22 was a breath of fresh air. I took to the rails and the skies, immersing myself in new cultures, working from bustling coffee shops, and reconnecting with the world and its people. This reawakening reminded me of the joy and energy that thoughtful social interactions can bring, even for someone who often finds them draining. The beauty of my work is its lack of ties to any single location, which has allowed me to seek out social interactions in environments that resonate with me. Yet, travel isn't a viable option for everyone. At home, I find community in public spaces like libraries and coffee shops, and through virtual connections, like gaming online with friends, Age of Empires 4 being a favorite. Is there a way out of social isolation? Absolutely. And the most straightforward advice might just be to get out there. But it's essential to recognize that social isolation is a complex beast, with each person's experience being deeply personal and shaped by their own stories and struggles. For some, the path out of isolation might require confronting deep-seated anxieties and traumas, while others might find contentment in minimal interaction, perhaps taking a leaf out of Schopenhauer's book. And then there are those who, by nature or choice, find their peace in solitude. It's a spectrum, with countless shades of grey in between, and our needs for solitude or interaction can shift over time. Where I find myself on this spectrum is still a question, with the need for more or less interaction being a fluid thing. I'm curious about your stories. Do you find yourself spending a lot of time alone? What drives that choice? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Thank you for tuning in.